this navigation. This is video number 3, so you might want to see video 1 and 2 in the correct sequence, but if you're interested in this topic, follow me into the pilot lounge. Ladies and gentlemen, before starting, I shall remind you that there is a disclaimer to my videos. The disclaimer is linked now in the top left corner, so please make sure that you're familiar with what is said on that disclaimer. And now, before moving on, I shall also remind you the importance of the like and subscribe. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, my channel has failed. I didn't get enough like and subscription as needed. But since the last video was published more or less 1.5 years ago, I found a lot of pilots that told me, yeah, you know, I watched your videos, I found it very useful. And you know what is interesting is that there's many pilots that actually watch the video but they don't give the like and subscribe. So the watching time is very important for you too, but your like and subscription as well it is. So it's you that decide, by watching the videos of course, and by giving the like and subscription, is you that decide whether this channel is gonna have more videos or not. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this little action, like and subscribe. And let's move forward and let's talk about PBN.
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.
Hello everyone and welcome back to our PBN series of video. We are video number 3. It's the last video where we're gonna take some example of RNP charts. On the previous videos we discussed why the PBN exists. We discussed the RNAV certification, the RNP certification, and we spoke about on video number 2 the errors of the RNP systems, and we spoke about applicability of minimas. Today we're gonna get a quick look about the charts. So we are actually I'm gonna bring you around Europe, giving a look to different RNP and RNAV charts to see what are the differences, what are the requirements. So let's start straight away. I'm taking here a chart of Warszawa. As you can see, this is an RNAV SD indeed. We have RNAV SD black box on the top of the chart. For example, we can take the BAMSO departure with a number of points. Those points are depicted as whiskey alpha and then a series of numbers. So normally when you have whiskey alpha point, it means that this point is not a point defined as a radial distance, but is a point defined for the purpose of an area navigation system. For example, the point BAMSO could also be defined or could be found as a radial and distance system. We can find in top of the chart the RNAV 1 requirement, GNS or DME. This means that, for example, if you have an IRS and you are using area navigation with exclusively an IRS, that system will not be enough to be flying this SAD. Let's go and take another example. This is a standard arrival, and once again is an RNAV standard arrival from Marseille, and this is seen in the black box RNAV star. This time I can see in the note that the RNAV is given by the RNAV 1, the GNSS, the DME, or the National Reference Unit. So in this case, if I have a National Reference Unit only, I can still fly the RNAV standard arrival. You can also see that while the arrival, for example, the Lanco 1 Golf arrival, it's an RNAV standard arrival, the holding has been defined as a conventional holding where I find radial and distance. So for example, if I lose RNAV capability, I must still maintain the holding once I'm established inbound GEMCO if I lose the area navigation system. Let's take another example again. In this case, we are in London and we're looking at the Clapton 2 Echo departure. Once again, RNAV SAD, perfect, as depicted in the black box. But if I go reading in the notes, it's an RNP1 SAD with the radius to fix required. So this chart required the usage of a required navigation performance system. Not only the RNAV, I need an RNAV system with the augmentation system, and not only this navigation system, this RNP system has to be also certified for the reduce to fix operation. The reason is quite simple. If you look at the very beginning of the SAD of the Sierra Sierra Whiskey points 01, 03, 06, you actually have a radius of turn, so you're kind of flying a small DME arc around the GPS point. And for this reason, this little DME arc can only be flown with required navigation performance system. Now we're looking at the Balmulu's arrival. As you see, this one is just stars, which means that I don't need an FMS, I don't need an area navigation system to fly this standard arrival. I just need the VOR. So no matter the type of navigation, I can use those VOR to make navigation basically to point Altic, and from there, of course, I will most likely start a conventional approach procedure. So this type of procedure in this example might be flown completely without the FMS. Let's take another example. This is Marrakesh in Morocco, and you see that we can see RNAV stars. So these are stars that can only be flown with an area navigation system, and I can see on the chart it says RNAV GNSS. So it seems that your area navigation system must be based on the GPS. You will probably remember that we say that RNAV approaches are typically not used below the MSA, given the fact that a loss of precision in navigation will not be annunciated to the pilot. However, many SAD are RNAV for the simple reason that the first point of the navigation is granted. In fact, the aircraft is departing from the airport, and therefore there might be no doubt in the navigation of the first leg. In this specific case, however, due to the close proximity of obstacle in the area of Chambéry, the initial departure for this RNAV SAD is only granted in conventional navigation. This specific SAD might put some kind of pressure to the European pilots, given the fact that in Europe the back course approaches are not implemented, and therefore European pilots are not in the habit of flying back course procedure. Make sure that you are able to fly back course, because although not implemented for approaches, as it is in this example, the ILS back course is actually used for the departure, and it should be used to separate the aircraft from obstacle, as the localizer is deemed to be much more reliable and much more precise in navigation guidance than the RNAV navigation equipment. We have seen few examples of standard arrivals and departure. As we said in the previous video, normally the standard arrival and departure there are RNAV, but you have seen that despite some arrival and departure being RNAV, there are specific requirements for different standard arrival that might be published by the states, and you can only fly that RNAV procedure if your aircraft is equipped with that specific area navigation system. So some countries will accept an IRS, some countries will not accept. Actually, it's not depending on countries, could be just by the area of operation. So it will be depicted on the chart, but if you don't have that specific navigation system depicted on the chart, then you can't call yourself RNAV capable for that specific procedure. So you are RNAV, but not for that specific SAD or for that specific star. We have seen the case of Mulhouse, where, for example, the arrival is conventional navigation, you don't need an area navigation, and we also have seen the specific case of Stansted, where actually you need an RNP system, not an RNAV, an RNP system to fly that specific departure, and that was because of the requirement of the radius to fix during the departure. Let's give a look to some approaches now. What we're looking here is the Nice Côte d'Azur RNP approach Zulu runway 22, and this is an authorization required. It is authorization required because in fact you have the final segment which is less than 2 nautical miles. You see that in this case the miss approach is not RNAV, it's just on the heading, so that's a very simple miss approach, and this sorts out a lot of problem for the pilots, because in case of loss of the RNAV capability, of course the miss approach can be flown simply by flying an heading. I would say there's not much to say about this procedure, except that, of course, your operator and yourself need to be authorized. Also make you notice that it is an RNAV where the RNP is 0.3. This is equivalent to an LNAV VNAV approach. And in fact, if we look at the top, you see that where the normal frequency of EGNOS is written, in this case, you only have written RNAV, meaning that you don't need EGNOS to fly this procedure. So this procedure, this RNP, this required navigation procedure, is based mainly on the GPS and on the augmentation system of the GPS, with a required navigation performance at the last stage of the approach of 0.3 nautical miles. Let's take another example of an authorization required approach. We are now looking at Chambéry in France. This one is an LNAV VNAV approach equivalent. In fact, you see that same as for all LNAV VNAV, we have indication of non-baro VNAV compensated systems, the minimum temperature at which an aircraft can fly this procedure if its navigation system cannot automatically compensate for cold temperatures. You also see that when the temperature increases, of course, being a baro-aided approach, the glide path will increase, and you see that above 40 degrees, actually the glide path will be above 3.5 degrees. The final segment is straight. There wouldn't be a strict need for an RNAV approach on this one, but yes, the miss approach remain in this case RNP, and you see that you must follow this RNP point, and it's quite complex. Of course, without FMS you wouldn't be able to fly inside this tiny valley to perform the miss approach. In the minima, you see once again the minima are defined for the RNP of 0.5, and they only depends on the missed approach climb gradients that the aircraft would help on a single engine. Let's continue with another RNP approach. We are looking at the Madeira in Portugal. This is equivalent to an LNAV VNAV approach. You will find the minimum temperature for the approach plus 7.5 degrees, and you will see that the minima takes you significantly close to a number of obstacles in very short final. So basically your missed approach point happens to be, or you happen to be very close to some obstacle that could be even higher than the minima, and that is a significant problem. But in fact, if you see, the minima is defined on the decreasing required navigation performance. So you could be 0.3, which is the normal approach required navigation performance, but you have lower minima if your precision in navigation is higher, so the RNP 0.2 and the RNP 0.1. Of course, your operator must be approved for this type of operation down to a specific minima. For what concerns the miss approach remains an RNP procedure, remains a curved trajectory. So yes, your RNP system must be available also for the miss approach procedure. What we're looking here is the London runway 27 left, so Heathrow. We have an RNP approach. Once again, this approach is LNAV VNAV only. In fact, you see that in the box of EGNOS is written only RNAV. Despite this being a normal RNP, there's no need for authorization requirement there. Despite being a normal RNP, this procedure has been designed for LNAV operations only. Let's take another example with this Palma de Mallorca RNP runway 06 left.
As opposed to what happened in London, this approach is exclusively designed as LPV operations. In fact, you can find the EGNOS frequency in the top left corner, and if we go looking at the bottom of the chart, we will find that minima has been published for the LPV operation. It is interesting to note that LP operations are not authorized because there's no minima published. Also, the LNAV VNAV, of course, and the LNAV are not published either. If we go looking for the miss approach, we might find some interesting information. The miss approach reads from Papa Alpha 410, we should fly to Papa Alpha 420 at a mandatory altitude of 2000 feet. However, it is clearly said and is also charted adding at 036. And this causes a little bit of problem because you should know very well that 2 points are connected by a track and not by a heading. For example, if there is strong southerly wind, by flying heading 036 you will be drifting towards the north. This means that you will be drifting closer to the mountains. So it is factually impossible to fly
between 410 and 420 with a heading. You must maintain a track. However, this heading could be a good suggestion to be used in case your navigation system loses precision in navigation. In this case, you could continue straight until the end of the runway and then fly this heading. It remains the fact that you should be able to identify the end of the runway if the aircraft is in IMC. And of course, the only means to do that is using time. But if the pilot did not start time for the approach, in case of loss of area navigation system, doing this procedure of flying the misapproach maintaining the heading will be a bit more complex. In all cases, this heading would be until reaching the minimum vector altitude and therefore until the moment we become able to receive radar vectoring. It is also worth noticing that the misapproach ends up over the VOR of Mike Juliet Victor. But in this procedure, the VOR of Mike Juliet Victor has been charted as a GPS point. And this is in fact correct. This is clearly what it is. Mike Juliet Victor in this case will be used as a GPS point, meaning that we should not hold, neither we should go around or should start the transition procedure to or from Mike Juliet Victor using the conventional navigation. The navigation protected area remains RNP precision, therefore 0.3 nautical miles for the misapproach, and RNP 1 for the initial approach, RNP approach, this means RNP 0.3 for the final approach. In few words, once you start this approach from Mike Juliet Victor, in the segment of 257 you will have an RNP of 1, in the segment of 327 you will have an RNP 1. Transitioning from Papa Alpha 09 Whiskey to Papa Alpha 05 Whiskey, your RNP will be decreasing to the RNP approach. So it will be a gradual reduction of the protection area from 1 to 0.3 nautical miles. From Papa Alpha 05 Whiskey to the minima, you will be in RNP approach. This means 0.3 or less depending on your navigation system, and in the case of this LPV approach it means that the RNP approach will be decreasing during the approach itself. It is also worth noticing that unlike an ILS, on this LPV approach the chart publish an altitude versus distance table. The altitude versus distance table is normally not published for ILSs because ILSs are only checked at the final approach point and at the other marker or equivalent position. The LPV approach instead have a published altitude versus distance table, which however is just used to cross-check the GPS position against itself, because as you can see we are checking the altitude against the distance from the GPS position of the runway 06 left. Let's take another example of Wien in Austria. RNP runway 16, authorization required. With a curved final approach segment, this type of approach are typically used to reduce noise impact, especially in night operation over noise-sensitive airports. By looking in detail, once again we find that there is no ignis frequency because this approach will be flown in LNAV VNAV, and in the note it is clearly specified that the GNSS and the IRS are required, meaning that most likely we need an FMS. If we go looking at the minima, once again we find just one minima for the RNP authorization required, with an RNP of 0.3 during the approach. It is interesting noticing that the misapproach once again is flown to a VOR, which once again has been described as a GPS point. Once again, the captain has to establish the course of action to be used shall the navigation performance come less or the FMC fail. In this case, most likely, flying the misapproach as an RNAV or even joining the holding as a conventional VOR procedure could be a good solution, given the fact that in the area between the initial approach fix and the misapproach point there is no significant obstacle. In this example we have the RNP approach runway 07 for Paris Lebouget. This approach can be flown either as an LNAV VNAV, either as an LPV approach, and you see the minima has been published for different climb gradient in case you have an LVP approach. Of course, you have the frequency of EGNOS, which is published only in the case you're taking an LP or LPV approach. It's useless if you're taking a NAV-VNAV approach, of course. What is interesting about this procedure is that normally the captain has to determine the course of action shall the navigation system be lost? But here there is a box that tells you what to do if you lose navigation capability before the final approach fix or point, and what to do if you lose navigation capability after the final approach fix or point, which is navigate direct to Papa Bravo 412. So now I guess many of you might have a good question and say, yeah, but wait a minute, are the friends stupid? How can I navigate to Papa Bravo 412 if I lost the navigation system?
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.
Well, no, the French are not stupid. As we said before, you could lose your RNP capability, but it's not said that you will lose your RNAV capability. So you can still fly to that point as an RNAV point. Indeed, if you lose completely your area navigation capability, the captain will have to determine a course of action, which most likely will be set a heading which is in the direction of Papa Bravo 412. Let's now take another example. We're looking at the RNP running 26 left, Paris Charles de Gaulle. Once again, you see here the minima are published for the LPV, LNAV, LNAV-NAV, and LNAV. I would like also to attract your attention on the EGNOS channel for this approach. And let's give a look to a close-by airport, which is indeed very close. In this airport, the EGNOS frequency is different, though the airport is less than 5 kilometers away from Lebouget. Just to clarify that EGNOS is transmitting on several channels, and every specific channel has its own differential information for the navigation related to the specific airport. This is why it is particularly important to verify the channel of EGNOS for every specific frequency, because each channel will be dedicated to a specific approach. Concerning this Innsbruck RNP Echo Runway 26, it's an LPV approach, and of course you have the requirement to have an RNP approach capability for the approach itself. But what is interesting is that if we go reading the miss approach, we clearly say to climb straight ahead to Whiskey India 614, which is indeed an RNP procedure, but then we turn left and we climb by the RNAV miss approach. Now this is very interesting because I remind you that if you fly RNAV, there is no legal requirement to have a warning if your system loses precision in navigation, or we can even say that your FMS can give you an ANP, but the ANP itself is not certified anymore. And there still are significant obstacles during the miss approach itself. So in case of RNAV, it would be still wise to tune in some conventional navigation system to cross-check your position in case of unnotified loss of precision of your RNAV equipment. It's also worth noticing that in this case, coding of the FMS is extremely important. In fact, the miss approach point Whiskey India 614 is a flyover point. A simple mistake of coding from flyover to flyby could have a very serious outcome on the miss approach. It is very important that this procedure is checked at the stage of the briefing for correct coding in the FMS for both the approach and the miss approach itself, to verify that there is no miscoding of the sequence of points, no miscoding of the coordinates, and no miscoding of the flyby flyover points. In this other case, we are looking at an ILS procedure where once again we have an RNAV miss approach. The same consideration we did before for the RNP Echo miss approach. Again, you can fly this miss approach in RNAV, but what if your RNAV equipment fails during the miss approach, for example, once you are approaching the point Whiskey India 006? This route in this case shall be flown as heading and time.
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.
Given the fact that this topic seems to be very easy, we will make a small recap with a table to review what are the available approaches and in which approaches can or must you use the RNAV VNAV. Consider that I will refer to the RNAV VNAV, but we must take into account that many aircraft they will depict the RNAV VNAV profile exactly the same way as the ILS approach profile. So you will fly not in RNAV VNAV the approach, but you will actually press the approach button to fly the PBN approach, just to make the things a little bit more confusing for pilots.
We'll now take into consideration this table where we're gonna take into analysis every type of procedure. We're gonna see how laterally and vertically this procedure is certified. We're gonna ask ourselves if the autopilot is required, automatic flight director system, therefore also the throttle. And we're gonna look at how the automation is certified if its use is needed. And then we're gonna ask us a very often asked question is, may I use RNAV VNAV to fly this procedure? So let's start with the conventional SAD and star that we saw. That was the case, for example, of Val Mulhouse, where we have a chart where it just says star or SAD. That is a conventional arrival or departure and is certified on the VOR, DME, NDB, localizer, or anyway conventional navigation system. The vertical certification is just based on the barometric altimeter. There is definitely not need for having any functioning autopilot on board the aircraft, therefore there is no specific certification mode. And the question, can I use RNAV VNAV, is yes, but of course in the note I will tell you, yes, you can use RNAV VNAV to fly this procedure, but you should still cross-check the conventional navigation to make sure that your aircraft is taking you in the correct route. Now, is it also true that if your aircraft is RNP certified, then the navigation system will also advise you if there is a loss in precision on navigation. Therefore, in this case, you could consider even not setting the conventional navigation because the system will advise you if there is a loss of precision in navigation. However, this practice is not really recommended because, as we saw, the integrity of conventional navigation is higher than the integrity of area navigation. Therefore, there could be cases where your area navigation system is not guiding you correctly. Let's continue with the visual approach. Of course, for the visual approach there is no certification for both lateral and vertical, and of course the autopilot is not required, and there is therefore no certification for any autopilot mode. Now, if the question is, can I use RNAV VNAV? Legally speaking, the answer is yes, you can use RNAV VNAV. However, you should use caution because in the visual approaches you should use your visual clues to separate yourself from obstacle, from terrain, and from other traffic. If you use RNAV VNAV, you must fly along a predetermined path, and it's not said that that path will take you clear of obstacle, clear of traffic, or will satisfy any other need that you might have during the visual approach, like for example making a longer track mile to lose a bit more altitude if needed. After that, we can give a look to the NDB and VOR timed approaches. Of course, the lateral of these approaches is certified based on the VOR or based on the NDB. The area navigation of this navigate, as you very well know, is 5 degrees, and again the vertical certification there is none. You are still certified using the barometric altitude. There is no requirement for automatic flight director system. However, if you have automation, it is strongly recommended that you do use automation during this type of non-precision approaches, and therefore if you use the automation you should be using either adding or overlock for the lateral and vertical speed, or the path or angle descent for the vertical. Can I use RNAV VNAV? The answer again is yes, you can use RNAV VNAV for this type of approaches. However, you should use extreme caution because timed approach are based on a specific speed along a specific track. The FMS is designed to fly along distances rather than time. So the FMS, or most of the FMSs, will have difficulty in producing a track that comply with a specific time. Even more important, it is not said, so you must ensure that the FMC is correctly programmed with the correct speed for the procedure, because of course, if you don't respect the correct speed, you won't be respecting the correct times. So potentially, yes, you could use the area navigation system, but you have to use extreme caution, because the area navigation system most likely is gonna cause more problems, so it's gonna give more difficulties than advantages. So I wouldn't really recommend it. If you have a VOR DME or an NDB DME, again, same as above, you are certified 5 degrees from the nav aid, still at barometric altitude, there's no requirement for the autopilot. And once again, you should use heading or VOR for the lateral, and you should use VS or PAT angle descent for the vertical. Once again, you can use the LNAV-VNAV, and this time, yes, you do have a real advantage in using LNAV-VNAV, because it transforms a VOR approach into an approach that really looks like an ILS approach. So all the pilot has to do is to verify that the FMS is taking him within the 5 degrees and is taking him on the correct altitude versus distance during the approaches. So it does really simplify the approach in this specific case. But once again, you must be aware that what certified approaches the VOR, so if the LNAV actually take you out of the required angle of navigation or angle of descent, then you have to take action and revert from the LNAV or from the VNAV to a different mode in order to correct the error that you have found during the approach, or eventually you will have to make a missed approach. Let's continue with the DME, localizer DME, where the maximum deviation is 1 dot from the localizer, and of course the localizer is a non-precision approach again, so it's a barometric altitude for the vertical guidance. There is no requirement for the autopilot, and the certification, of course, for the lateral is localizer, once again vertical speed or path angle for the descent. Shall I use LNAV? Well, at this point the answer is no. On the localizer you shall not use LNAV, because the localizer is deemed to be more accurate than the LNAV. In fact, the ILS is a more accurate approach than the LP, or than the anyway than the LPV, or anyway than the LNAV-VNAV. So no, because the localizer is more accurate than the FMC guidance, you should use the lateral mode of localizer. It's a yes for the vertical, because the vertical, again, you would be descending in vertical speed or predetermined programmed path angle, and therefore by using VNAV you again simplify, same as for the VOR DME or NDB DME, you simplify the management of the vertical profile. So now you just have to cross-check once again altitude versus distances during the approach. With this, we completed the conventional non-precision approaches. Now we have to talk about the SAD and STAR, which are RNAV and RNP. We are getting into the PBN area. Now, as we see in these RNAV and RNP stars are very similar. We're talking of area navigation system. The only difference among the two is that if you have an RNAV SAD, you should tune in a navigation aid to verify the correct position of your RNAV navigation system. Again, if you're flying an RNAV SAD using an RNP navigation system, there isn't this strict need, because the system will advise you if there is a loss of precision in navigation. Therefore, for the RNP SAD, this requirement of having a conventional navigation to verify your position is not strictly needed. But again, to fly an RNP SAD, now you need to have an RNP certified system rather than an RNAV certified system. For the RNP SAD, we can say that it's normally flown with a GPS augmented by RAIN, so binary-based augmentation system. While for the RNAV SAD, you could fly an RNAV SAD, and we see some example. Very often we got specific restriction by the local authority, so you have to make sure that you can fly that RNAV SAD with the specific area navigation. But the RNAV SAD, of course, you can fly with DME system, a VOR DME system. You could fly it with a GPS, you could fly with an IRS, with an INS, or of course with an FMS. This one being said, now we can get into the family of the PBN approaches. On the PBN approach, we continue with the non-precision approaches, which is the LNAV. So the LNAV is a lateral navigation based on the GPS plus the R-based augmentation system. Maximum deviation is half of the RNP. I remind you that the RNP approach is 0.3 nautical mile. The vertical profile of this approach is not certified, so again it's barometric altitude. The question is, shall I use the autopilot? And same for the RNP SAD, I forgot to mention, but for all these RNP operation, the autopilot is a requirement. In fact, the operator might lift, say, its operation from this requirement by demonstrating every 6 months that his crew is able to fly the procedure, the relevant procedure, in manual flight. If this is not done, then the autopilot becomes a specific requirement. How should I fly an LNAV approach? Indeed, lateral has to be flown in LNAV, and the vertical should be flown in vertical speed or predetermined path descent angle. Lateral navigation, of course, must be selected in LNAV, and I could use VNAV for the approach. And now, bear in mind, we are still doing a non-precision approach, so we are descending to an MDA, but I'm actually using VNAV with the same logic I was using VNAV for the VOR DME approaches. So just to simplify the approach. I can remind you that all PBN approach have published an altitude versus distance table, therefore the pilot should cross-check the altitude versus distance during the approach. Remains the fact that for LNAV and LP approaches the vertical profile is not certified, while for the LPV and the LNAV VNAV approaches this vertical profile is certified. However, cross-checking the profile of the GPS against the GPS itself is quite useless, because we are cross-checking our altitude against the GPS point. So if that GPS point is incorrect because of a navigation system error, our descent profile will remain incorrect. So what is the purpose of doing this anyway? Well, the answer is very simple, and the reason is that for the vertical profile, this altitude cross-check allows us to verify that the aircraft is descending correctly according to the profile calculated by the GPS. So the altitude versus distance, once again, it just confirms the vertical profile against the GPS calculation, but does not protect us from any navigation system error. Same thing for the LNAV. This time the lateral is based on the sorry, my mistake. Same thing if we talk about the localizer perform approach. This time the lateral is based on the GPS augmented by a satellite-based augmentation system. We remain half of the RNP, the maximum deviation, and exactly the same way, exactly the same description we have for the LNAV. Yes, we must use LNAV for the lateral navigation. The approach is designed to be flown as a VS or a path angle descent approach, but I could decide to use VNAV for the approach, but it remains the fact that I'm flying a non-precision approach, and therefore I am descending to a minimum descent altitude, which of course has to be revised in the cases that we discussed earlier. I know that some of you now will tell me that this thing of VNAV is getting a bit more vicious. Yes, it's true, but we must admit that by using the FMC or the GPS calculated profile, we really simplify the life of the pilot, because we don't have to go VS and try to follow the altitude versus distance, but we just couple the aircraft to the VNAV calculated profile and we just cross-check the altitude versus distance. Moving to the APV approaches with vertical guidance, now we are descending to a decision altitude because we are flying 3D approaches. The LNAV approach once again is a GPS augmented by the air-based augmentation system. This time is both for the lateral and the vertical guidance. This time I must use LNAV and VNAV for the approach, and same consideration for the autopilot. It is required unless the operator has been lifted from this requirement. I can say that the RNP approach, it's 0.3 nautical miles. So the question could be, but why do you call it RNP approach and not 0.3 nautical mile? Well, we call it RNP approach because, as you can see, in this case for the LNAV, VNAV, the RNP approach is not only 0.3 nautical miles, but the RNP approach is 0.3 nautical miles plus
laterally plus 150 feet vertically. So the RNP approach is a set of maximum deviation acceptable for that procedure, which in this case is a lateral and a vertical. If we move to the localizer performance with vertical guidance, again GPS plus satellite-based augmentation system for both lateral and vertical. Same consideration, the autopilot is required and has to be coupled in LNAV, VNAV. This time, half of the RNP approaches the maximum deviation, but for a localizer performance with vertical guidance, the lateral and the vertical deviation will start as 0.3 nautical mile and 150 feet, but will be decreasing through the approach until we reach the missed approach point. At the missed approach point, the localizer performance with vertical guidance will give you a maximum deviation which could be in the range of 0.1 nautical miles. After this, we finish with the approaches with vertical guidance, and now we move into the family of the precision approaches. But the family of precision approaches now has been increased with another PBN approach, and this PBN approach is the GLS approach. The GLS approach, of course, is GPS augmented by the ground-based augmentation system. This time, the ground-based augmentation system plus GPS is required for both lateral and vertical, and indeed, yes, I need the autopilot to fly this approach. And once again, I am flying a 3D approach to a decision altitude. With this, we close the PBN area, and we can go to the conventional precision approaches, ILS Cat 1, 2, and 3. As you see, ILS Cat 1, maximum deviation is 1 dot. It's a 3D approach, so I got the vertical certified, same as the lateral. Glide slope is 1 dot. There is no requirement for the autopilot, and the approach has been certified for pilots if using the autopilot, using the approach mode. So the localizer plus the glide slope. The question could be, can I use LNAV? The answer is no, because as we said, the LNAV is less precise than the localizer. So using LNAV, actually, I have a higher error in the navigation. So technically speaking, yes, you could use LNAV, but once again, same as it is for the VOR, same as it is for the localizer for the NDP, once again, you have to verify that LNAV and that VNAV will keep you on the correct path by looking at the ILS, glide slope, and localizer. So if you really want, yes, you could go LNAV and then verify that you stay within 1 dot of locking light. But again, what is the purpose? The LNAV is less precise, so there is no advantage in doing that. There could be some advantages, like for example, some aircraft, once they are in glide slope mode, they inhibit the altitude acquired, so you cannot do a circling out of an ILS. In this case, yes, you could use an LNAV VNAV for the approach, for the ILS approach, because the LNAV VNAV instead will acquire the altitude. Continue with our ILSs. We got the ILS Cat 2, where same deviation, maximum 1 dot, and this time the autopilot is required, but you can see in the notes that it's a 3D approach automatically coupled, but the landing can be made manually. And again, we must use autopilot. This time there's no excuses. The autopilot has to be coupled to the approach mode, therefore in glide, in lock and glide for a Cat 2 approach. If we fly a Cat 3 approach, same logic, 1 dot laterally and vertically. The autopilot is required. You also must have an automatic control of the thrust, because the Cat 3 is an auto-couple approach with automatic landing, which therefore will require automatic control of thrust. Once again, there is no room for any other different mode than the approach, so this approach, a Cat 3 approach, must be flown with autopilot coupled on the lock and the glide slope. With this, we review all the procedures. Actually, if you are looking carefully, you probably have noted that we missed one. Yes, we miss our 4D approach. For the 4D approach is again, is a PBN approach, is an approach with vertical guidance, and it's our RNP authorization required approach. We say the authorization required approach is mainly based on an R-based augmentation system, so it's an LNAV VNAV approach. Once again, we got the GPS augmented by the R-based augmentation system, and this approach has to be flown with the autopilot, and the autopilot must be coupled. Now it's a 4D approach, so the autopilot must be coupled laterally to the LNAV, vertically to the VNAV path, so the VNAV angle control, and the automatic control of thrust, if present, has to be coupled to the VNAV speed. Now, the automatic control of thrust is not a specific legal requirement, so an aircraft without auto throttle can be authorized for an RNP AR procedure, but in this case it's the pilot that has to make sure that the VNAV speed is manually followed by the pilot during the approach, because once again this is a 4D approach, therefore there is control of the lateral, the vertical and the speed of the aircraft in order to comply with the radius of turns. So in this module we have seen all the PBN approaches, we have seen the conventional navigation approach, we have discussed when you can use LNAV VNAV, and I'll remind you that the pilot is responsible to cross-check his position. Now, concerning the SOP on where and how to use a LNAV VNAV, there are various companies with various SOP. There's many pilots that says, well, if you do a VOR approach, I believe you should keep a VOR in view for at least one pilot, and I totally agree with this personally, but we must admit that there is a number of companies that they do fly VOR approaches, and there's no requirement for pilots to actually have an HSI monitoring the position on the VOR, so they just do the VOR approach flying LNAV VNAV. Which, as a matter of fact, as we say, it is totally legal, so there's nothing we can say against it. For what concern the position, the PBN will be replacing slowly the conventional navigation, so we will see a phase out of NDB and quite soon a phase out of the VOR. In fact, many countries like Italy already phased out the NDBs, especially the locators, which result in a significant loss of position awareness for pilots during the ILS, during the final approach segments. But this, of course, has been replaced by position given by the FMSs. In future, June 2030, the EASA will lift the requirement of having navigation based on VOR. So all countries will be able to publish their procedure exclusively based on PBN navigation. Now we have to discuss on what kind of aircraft will be navigating, because the unmanned flight is kicking into the operations as well. So the airspace will be organized for both manned and unmanned flight. Of course, for the unmanned flight, the PBN is more than enough to certify. The numbers are quite solid, as we can see. But for what concerns the manned flight, so for a pilot that sits on the aircraft, my strong recommendation is that a pilot continues to check his position using the conventional navigation for as far as possible, or anyway using heading and time, because we have seen that every time computers are involved in the conduct of the flight, there is a number of possibilities, statistical possibility, that your aircraft will lose the precision in navigation and eventually will not even inform you.
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.
So with this we conclude our series of video concerning PBN. We have introduced why the PBN is needed, we have introduced the RNAV, the RNP certification, we have talked about the certification criteria and the statistical certification of the electronic system involved in the PBN. We have spoken about the error of the navigation system, indeed the simplicity on how this navigation system might be used, and finally we took some examples. What is the future for PBN? Well, I would say is indeed bright. PBN is indeed the future for air navigation. It remains the fact that as the number of VORs and NDB will decrease, the pilot uncertainty on position will increase unavoidably. A number of navigation system remains available, like it would be the simple adding in time as it was done in the old times, and this remains available by the pilot. While by certification, the PBN or the RNP operation will be sufficient to guarantee the operation as a pilot sitting on a real aircraft and not as a drone pilot indeed, well, I would say that is not a safe conduct, blindly relying on the navigation system when we use PBN operations. So my strong recommendation is that you continuously cross-check your position using all available navigation systems. The future will be indeed in the, as I said, in the increase of the direct trajectory-based operation, the so-called TBO. We already have the free routing in cruise in many European countries. The Europeans have started a program named CESAR, which is the Single European Sky ATM Research, and this gave the birth to the direct routing airspaces. There will be active collaborative decision making, which basically will allow a major computer to collect a wide number of information on every single flight. Thanks to the artificial intelligence and to the computer calculation, it will be possible to predict the aircraft trajectory and make the short-term and long-term planning and conflict detection. In few words, having a departure time or an expected departure time based on the boarding of the aircraft and having the weight of the aircraft, the air traffic service will be able to determine if that flight will be in conflict with another flight during the flight, either 1 hour or even more than 1 hour before the start of the flight. With this, indeed, the job of the pilot will be always more limited and more slaved to the machine. As I said before, it remains the fact that while 99% of the time you fly on the Magenta line, having position awareness remains a major requirement for a professional pilot. I would like to thank you for your attention, for watching those videos, and once again, put your like and subscribe if you like this video, and I hope to see you again in one of the future videos. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, right, but that is not going to end up on the internet, is it?
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.